The moment I stepped into that federal courtroom, my daughter, Victoria, let out a light, nervous giggle, covering her mouth as if she were watching a pathetic joke. My son-in-law, Harrison Vance, just smirked and shook his head, looking down at his polished fingernails. They thought they were looking at a frail, beaten old man playing dress-up. But then, Judge John Carmichael looked up from his bench. The air left the room. The judge's face, which had been a mask of tired bureaucracy, went completely white, ashen and bloodless. His gold-rimmed reading glasses slipped, and his wooden gavel escaped his trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the bench. The echoing sound was deafening in the sudden, dead silence. In a voice caught and amplified by the microphone, a voice dripping with pure, unadulterated shock, he whispered a name nobody in that room knew: the Scalpel. He wasn't looking at a helpless senior citizen anymore. He was staring directly at a ghost. My family thought they were walking into a simple, emergency hearing to put a senile old man in a cage and steal his assets. They had absolutely no idea that they had just declared a total, catastrophic war on a ghost. Before I tell you how a quiet father systematically executed a cold, calculated financial autopsy to rip his son-in-law's life apart root and stem, welcome to Vengeance Never Sleeps. If you believe that true strength doesn't scream, but waits for the precise moment to make its devastating move, smash that like button and subscribe right now. Before we continue, leave a comment below letting me know which state you are listening from today. Whether you are tuning in from the financial canyons of New York, the sun-baked estates of California, the proud plains of Texas, or the coasts of Florida, I want to see your name in the ledger. Now, let us turn back the pages of the ledger to where this insult first began. It began, as these things often do, with an insult I was meant to swallow. It was a Sunday dinner in Greenwich, Connecticut, the capital of America's hedge fund elite. I was sitting at the far end of a polished, 20-foot mahogany table, a piece of furniture so long and sterile it felt like a landing strip. My daughter, Victoria, and her husband, Harrison, were holding court inside their sprawling, $15 million mansion. The infinity pool is completely non-negotiable, Harrison, Victoria said, her voice sharp, demanding, and utterly shallow. It needs to look seamless, like the water is pouring right into the canyon below. Harrison, a man whose custom-tailored Wall Street suits always seemed one size too tight for his ego, didn't even look up from his glowing phone screen. Whatever you want, baby. As soon as this Hamptons Resort project closes next week, it's a guaranteed 9-figure play. I'll buy you a pool filled with vintage champagne if you want. They talked right through me, discussing pool contractors, million-dollar liquidity reports, and Victoria's upcoming charity gala as if I weren't even sitting there. I am Nathaniel Sterling, 71 years old, and in my own daughter's home, I was completely invisible. Ever since my wife, Isabel, passed away 10 years ago, I had done what I thought was right. I sold our family home, bought the small guest house tucked away on the edge of this massive estate, and tried to be close to my only child. I thought it was patience. I saw now it was just permission. The only person who recognized my presence was my 16-year-old grandson, Logan. He looked down the long expanse of the table, his eyes honest. "Grandpa, my playoff football game is next Friday. We're playing Palisades. Do you want to come?" Before I could open my mouth, Harrison cut him off. His voice was slick with casual, dismissive contempt, not even bothering to glance in my direction. "Logan, don't bother your grandfather. He needs his rest. He's old, tired, and honestly, he probably gets exhausted just from sitting there." Victoria let out that same light, airy giggle. "He's right, honey. Just let him be." They diagnosed my energy, my desires, and my entire existence without a single glance. I said nothing. I just looked down at the intricate pattern on my porcelain plate, where a single piece of asparagus had gone cold and limp. They had turned me into a ghost in my own life. But Harrison wasn't satisfied with merely making me invisible. He wanted to test the limits of my submission, to see how much of a burden he could make me feel. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass, his eyes landing on me with a calculating, predatory coldness. "You know, Victoria," Harrison said, his voice raised deliberately so it would carry down the table to my ears. "The energy grid costs in Connecticut are skyrocketing this winter. The utility bills for that guest house are getting ridiculous. We might need to look into turning down the central heating system over there. We can't be subsidizing a luxury climate for someone who just sleeps all day." Victoria didn't even flinch. She just nodded, turning a page of her luxury fashion magazine. Harrison then snapped his fingers, catching the attention of the estate's private chef who was clearing the plates. "And starting tomorrow, let's lighten up the grocery deliveries to the guest house. Cut back on the premium proteins and the expensive greens. He's 71. A man who doesn't move or exercise doesn't need that much protein. It's just a waste of asset management. The chef looked uncomfortable, glancing at me briefly before bowing his head and retreating into the kitchen. The humiliation was raw, direct, and meticulously calculated. Harrison was trying to starve out my dignity, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, right in front of my daughter. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to break, to yell, or to plead for my comfort. But I didn't say a word. My hands remained perfectly steady as I rested them on the edge of the mahogany table. I didn't touch the cold food. I just looked at Harrison's smug, arrogant face, and then at Victoria's indifferent eyes. I didn't feel a heart attack coming on. I didn't feel sadness. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over my mind. 30 years ago in Washington, D.C., corrupt politicians and fraudulent Wall Street billionaires had sat across from me in interrogation rooms, screaming, crying, and begging for mercy when I laid out their crimes. Harrison thought I was a broken armchair he could throw out into the snow. He had no idea that the old accountant sitting at the end of his table was the man who had built the very legal firewalls he was trying to manipulate. The spring was being compressed. The hot coal was burning red beneath the sawdust. And when the scalpel finally decided to make its first cut, Harrison Vance would learn that some debts are paid in absolute ruin. 3 days after that freezing Sunday dinner, a sharp, impatient knock rattled the door of my guest house. It was Harrison. This was a rare, almost unprecedented event. Usually, he avoided my small house as if it carried a biological plague, most likely because its walls lacked the gold-plated fixtures and marble molding of his main mansion. He stepped into my living room, his face stretched into a slick, practiced salesman's smile. Without an invitation, he pushed a heavy, dust-covered bottle into my hands. "For you, Nate," Harrison beamed, his voice dripping with theatrical generosity. "Top of the line, a $2,000 vintage Screaming Eagle Cabernet. Only the best for family." I looked down at the heavy glass bottle, its label screaming of wealth and manipulation. Harrison knew I didn't drink. My cardiologist had made that completely, undeniably clear after my triple bypass surgery. This gesture wasn't an act of kindness. It was stagecraft. It was the classic opening move of a Wall Street vulture, offering a gift that costs them nothing to establish an emotional debt before they pull out the knife. He didn't just enter my living room, he assessed its value, his eyes scanning my modest bookshelf and old mahogany desk, calculating exactly how much leverage he could squeeze out of my small world. The transformation was instantaneous. It was as if a beautiful, expensive mask had been violently ripped away, revealing the reptilian fury of a cornered animal underneath. The salesman's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, vicious snarl. He snatched the $2,000 bottle of wine from my hands and slammed it flat onto my wooden coffee table with enough force to splinter the grain. The dark red liquid exploded out of the cork, splashing across my old books and pooling across the dark mahogany like a fresh, widening stain of blood. "Unbelievable," Harrison hissed, stepping into my personal space, his chest heaving with rage. "Just incredible. After everything Victoria and I do for you, allowing you to live here on our land rent-free, and you won't lift a single finger to help your own family? My God, you are one selfish, pathetic old man." He stormed out of the guest house, slamming the heavy wooden door behind him with a force that made the framed photograph of my late wife, Isabel, tremble on my desk. I didn't flinch. I didn't wipe the red wine from the table. I just sat there, my calloused hands resting on my knees, staring at the deep red puddle. Harrison thought I was a parasite living on his charity. He thought he owned the world, and that I was just a tenant in his kingdom. What his arrogant, Wall Street mind didn't know. What his expensive lawyers had conveniently failed to check in their rush to buy this property was a profound, devastating legal reality. 10 years ago, when I left Connecticut to move to Los Angeles, I didn't just buy this little guest house. I bought the entire 2-acre parcel of prime Greenwich land that his sprawling, $15 million mansion was sitting on. Harrison's prestigious 99-year land lease, which allowed him to maintain his grand lifestyle for a symbolic $1 a year, was not held by a bank or a corporate entity. It was held by me. The arrogant son-in-law who had just humiliated me was, in fact, building his castle on land legally owned by the very father he despised. He thought he had just threatened a helpless senior citizen. He had no idea he was a tenant who had just vandalized his landlord's property. The ledger was open, the debt had been recorded, and the scalpel was preparing for its very first, agonizing cut. A week after Harrison stormed out of my guest house, the venom he left behind finally found its mark. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to a crushing, suffocating weight pressing down directly on my chest. It wasn't the explosive, sharp pain of a massive heart attack, but the familiar, terrifying grip of acute, stress-induced angina. My cardiologist's warning from my triple bypass recovery echoed clearly through my mind. Nate, don't try to be a hero. If the stress gets to you and the chest pains return, get to a clinic immediately. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I snatched my phone from the nightstand. I didn't call an ambulance yet. I called the main house. I called Victoria. She was my only daughter, the only blood I had left in this world. I thought that despite Harrison's toxic influence, the fundamental bond between a child and her father would still mean something in the dead of night. The phone rang 4 times, each ring feeling like a heavy hammer blow against my ribs, before Victoria finally picked up. Dad? Seriously, what is it? Her voice snapped through the line, completely thick with sleep and absolute irritation. Do you have any idea what time it is? It's the middle of the night. Victoria, honey, I need your help, I managed to say, my voice sounding incredibly thin, raspy, and strained as I clutched my chest. I'm not feeling right. The chest pains are back. It's getting hard to breathe. Can you please just drive me down to the federal medical clinic? Just to be safe. A heavy, exasperated sigh came through the receiver. It was the distinct, crushing sound of profound inconvenience. Dad, are you kidding me right now? Victoria groaned, her tone turning entirely heartless and dismissive. I have the major Greenwich Charity Gala Committee meeting first thing in the morning. The entire executive board is arriving early at the resort spa. I cannot miss this. You're always overreacting over every little flutter in your chest. If you think you're actually dying, just call 911. Don't ruin my morning schedule over a panic attack. Click. The line went completely dead. She didn't ask how severe the pain was. She didn't ask if I was alone in the dark, terrified. She simply calculated the value of my life against her social status and chose the committee meeting. The ache in my chest tightened violently, but it wasn't from the angina anymore. It was from the absolute, freezing realization that the little girl I had raised had turned into a total stranger. I didn't call 911. I refused to let an emergency siren alert Harrison and let him celebrate my weakness. Instead, I opened the rideshare app on my phone and booked an Uber. I sat silently in the back of a stranger's Toyota Prius, clutching my chest through my winter coat, watching the dark, empty roads of Connecticut blur past. At the hospital, the medical team acted quickly. They administered a nitroglycerin tablet under my tongue and kept me attached to a swarm of monitors for 6 hours of observation. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the corporate fog had burned off, my vitals stabilized, and the doctor officially discharged me. I called another Uber to take me back to the estate. But as the car approached the exclusive, gated community where the main road split toward the high-end commercial district, my eyes caught a familiar sight. There, parked prominently in the VIP bay directly in front of the 5-star Greenwich Resort Spa, was a pristine, pearl-white Range Rover. I knew the license plate by heart. It belonged to Victoria. Through the massive, clear glass windows of the luxury spa, under the soft, golden ambiance of designer light fixtures, I could see her. She was sitting in a plush white robe, a glass of mimosa in her hand, laughing merrily with 3 other wealthy socialites while a therapist massaged her shoulders. She hadn't been rushing to a strict, administrative boardroom meeting. She had lied. She had completely abandoned her own father's life, leaving him to ride to an emergency room with a stranger in the dead of winter. Also, she wouldn't miss a morning of premium pampering, hot stone treatments, and high society gossip. I leaned my head back against the cold headrest of the Uber, my gaze remaining flat, empty, and entirely frozen. The last lingering shred of grief and paternal warmth inside my soul withered and turned to ash in that exact second. Victoria wasn't just a weak, easily manipulated daughter who had been misled by a greedy husband. She was fully complicit. She was a heartless predator who viewed my very existence as a pathetic nuisance to be managed and ignored. The spring had reached its absolute limit. As the Uber pulled through the iron gates of the property, I looked at the main mansion towering in the distance. Victoria had traded her father's life for a morning at the spa. Now, the ledger was completely unbalanced, and I was going to make sure she paid every single cent of that debt in pure, unmitigated ruin. The very next morning, the fragile illusion of my quiet retirement was officially shattered. I was sitting at my desk with a cup of black coffee, watching the gray winter fog slowly burn off the Connecticut canyon, when a sharp, impatient knock echoed through my small house. It wasn't Harrison's arrogant, heavy-handed bang, nor was it the gentle tap of my grandson, Logan. This knock was clinical. It was professional. I opened the door to find a man standing in a crisp, dark blue uniform, holding a digital scanner in one hand and a stiff, heavy white envelope in the other. Nathaniel Sterling? he asked, his voice flat, completely devoid of human emotion. I am Legal Express Delivery. Sign the screen. I pressed my thumb to the digital screen, my hand perfectly steady. He handed me the envelope, turned on his heel, and vanished into the morning chill before I could even close the door. The envelope felt heavy in my palms, not because of the weight of the paper, but because of the absolute malice packed inside it. I walked back to my mahogany desk, picked up the silver letter opener my wife, Isabel, had given me 30 years ago and slid it through the top seam. The words printed on the first page leaped out at me, cold, precise, and lethal. It was a formal legal petition, an emergency lawsuit filed in the Connecticut Superior Court. The petitioners were Harrison Vance and Victoria Sterling Vance. The respondent was me. They were seeking an emergency hearing for a total, permanent conservatorship. They weren't just trying to bully me anymore. They were launching a full-scale legal assassination. The document laid out their case with horrifying, calculated precision. They were formally accusing me, Nathaniel Sterling, of being completely mentally incapacitated. They claimed that due to my advanced age and recent health scares, I was suffering from severe, rapidly progressing dementia and intense paranoid delusions. They asserted that I was no longer capable of managing my own basic medical decisions, let alone my personal financial assets and retirement accounts. It was a brilliant, wicked strategy. They wanted to turn me into a non-person, a helpless ward of the state, a legal ghost stripped of every constitutional right, with the two of them holding the strings. If a judge signed this paper, they would instantly gain absolute control over my entire life savings, my investments, and my property, locking me away in a beige box of absolute irrelevance while they looted my world to finance their collapsing lifestyle. But as I flipped to the second page, the drama intensified, exposing just how vile my daughter and her husband truly were. Under the section labeled Exhibit A, they had included a 3-page comprehensive diagnostic report signed by a medical expert named Dr. Julian Albright. I read through the fabricated evidence, my jaw tightening. They had openly perjured themselves, fabricated sickening lies to reinforce my alleged insanity. The petition claimed that I frequently left the guest house in the middle of the night, wandering aimlessly and disoriented through the frozen property. Worse still, they accused me of demonstrating volatile, erratic behavior and enacting severe verbal abuse against my 16-year-old grandson, Logan. They wrote that I was a direct psychological danger to the boy, and they requested an immediate restraining order to separate me completely from the only person on this entire estate who actually loved me. They were using my innocent grandson as a weapon to isolate me in the dark. I stared down at the signature at the bottom of the evaluation, Dr. Julian Albright, psychological expert. A cold, dry laugh, more like a quiet, dangerous cough, escaped my lips. I set the paper down on the desk, my eyes turning as sharp and focused as a polished blade. Julian Albright. I had never seen this man, never spoken to him, and never met a single person by that name in my entire 71 years of life. Harrison and Victoria thought they had just executed a flawless, airtight legal ambush on a frail old man. They had no idea that by fabricating this medical report, they had just left a massive, bleeding footprint on the ledger. The scalpel was back in surgery, and I was about to dissect their perfect little lie, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but their own absolute ruin. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. Clutching the thick, white legal envelope in my hand, the heavy paper a stark contrast against my aged, weathered skin, I walked. I marched out of my small house, straight across the perfectly manicured lawn that separated my quiet world from their stolen paradise, and headed directly toward the main mansion. The glass doors leading to the massive rear patio were wide open. They were sitting by their brand new infinity pool, basking under the pale winter sun as if they didn't have a care in the world. Victoria was laid out on a plush chaise lounge, oversized designer sunglasses hiding her face, a luxury magazine balanced on her stomach. Harrison stood by the outdoor bar, casually pouring himself another premium cocktail. They looked completely relaxed, entirely untroubled, like two smug predators who had just set a flawless trap and were now waiting patiently for their prey to bleed out in the dark. As my shadow fell across the sun loungers, the music didn't stop, but the illusion of peace shattered instantly. Victoria sat up with a start, pulling her sunglasses down to her nose. The moment her eyes landed on the legal petition in my hand, she flinched, quickly turning her head away toward the bright blue water of the pool, utterly unable to look me in the eye. But Harrison was a seasoned performer. He set his drink down, wiped his hands on a silk towel, and crossed his arms over his chest, immediately stepping forward to assume a position of absolute power. "Dad," Harrison said, his voice dripping with an insufferable, condescending pity. He stepped closer, adjusting the collar of his linen shirt as a fake, practiced smile plastered across his face. We were really hoping you wouldn't have to see those papers until right before the hearing. But honestly, it's for your own good. After that little heart attack incident last week, Victoria and I realized you simply cannot take care of yourself anymore. You're forgetting things, Nate. You're profoundly confused. I had stress-induced angina. Harrison, I said, my voice completely flat, cold, and steady. He waved his manicured hand dismissively, completely erasing my reality with a smirk. That's just what your paranoid mind thinks it was. But you were disoriented. You need someone capable to manage things for you now. Someone to protect your dwindling finances, to make sure your bills are paid, and to handle your medical decisions before you seriously hurt yourself. He was gaslighting me, using the very medical emergency they had heartlessly ignored as the ultimate proof of my mental incompetence. He looked down at the petition, then locked his eyes onto mine, letting out a short, sharp, and incredibly ugly laugh. "See you in court, old man," Harrison sneered, his mask of false concern completely slipping away to reveal the vulture underneath. "Frankly, your hostility today just proves our point. You're paranoid. So here's a piece of professional advice. You better go find yourself a public defender. Because with your meager pension and Social Security, I really don't think you can afford a real lawyer in the state of Connecticut." Victoria kept her eyes glued to the pool, remaining completely silent as her husband laid out my legal execution. Harrison turned back to the outdoor bar, picked up his cocktail, and casually pressed the button on the wall-mounted estate intercom. "Security," he barked into the receiver, his eyes locked onto mine with challenging, malicious glee. "We have an intruder on the main patio. My father-in-law is wandering around again, acting disoriented and disrupting our relaxation space. Please come and escort him back to his designated guest house before he hurts himself." Within seconds, 2 burly estate security guards in dark tactical uniforms stepped onto the patio, their boots clicking sharply against the stone tiles. They approached me hesitantly, knowing who I was, but Harrison gave them a sharp, commanding nod. They reached out to take my arms, preparing to publicly drag me away like a trespassing vagrant in front of my own daughter. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't step back. With a single, icy glare, I froze the 2 guards in their tracks. They saw something in my eyes. A sudden, blinding flash of absolute, lethal authority that made them instantly drop their hands. I looked directly past them, staring straight into the hollow, arrogant eyes of my son-in-law. I didn't show fear. I didn't show anger. "The ledger always has to balance, Harrison," I said, my voice incredibly quiet, deep, and cutting through the winter air like a frozen scalpel. "The books never lie, and they never forget. Today, you didn't just file a lawsuit. You officially wrote your own name into the debt column, and I am coming to collect every single cent." I turned on my heel, walking away from the pool deck with a long, powerful stride before the guards could even process what had happened. Behind me, Harrison let out another loud, forced laugh to cover the sudden, uneasy chill that had just rippled through the patio. He thought he had just successfully humiliated a frail, forgetful old ghost. He had absolutely no idea that his petty greed had just awakened the monster that would consume his entire life. The scalpel was officially back in surgery, and the first incision was going to be deep, bloody, and entirely permanent. The sound of the front door lock clicking into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a line being drawn. A final, definitive boundary. Harrison and Victoria thought this guest house was merely the bedroom of a senile old man. They saw it as a quiet beige box for me to doze in, to be managed in, and to be forgotten in. They had never, not once, noticed the second door. I walked deep into the back of my walk-in closet, pushing aside a rack of old, heavy wool suits I hadn't worn in a decade. Behind the cedar paneling lay a solid titanium wall panel, completely invisible to the naked eye. I pressed my right thumb against a concealed, cold glass square. A faint green light washed over my skin. With a quiet, expensive snick, a heavy mechanical lock disengaged, and a section of the wall slid inward without a sound. I stepped across the threshold. This was my real home. The air inside was cool, sterile, and still. There was no bed, no television, and no recliner. Instead, the room was dominated by floor-to-ceiling server racks, 3 massive, glowing computer monitors, a wall of encrypted filing cabinets, and a dedicated, military-grade satellite communication console. Harrison thought I was a retired pencil pusher, a simple, low-level accountant who had spent his life managing small-town ledgers in Connecticut. He truly believed my greatest life achievement was saving just enough money for a modest retirement. He had absolutely no concept of what I was. 30 years ago in Washington, D.C., the most powerful corporate executives on Wall Street, corrupt United States senators, and billionaire cartel leaders didn't call me Nate. They called me the Scalpel. I was the chief of forensic financial investigations for the United States Department of Justice. I was the lethal weapon the government sent in when the numbers didn't just look wrong. They looked impossible. I didn't just track transactions. I dissected them down to the cellular level. I found the hidden offshore entities, the double-layered shell corporations, and the secret Swiss bank accounts that everyone else missed. I was the man who, with nothing but a single, flawless spreadsheet, had permanently dismantled the empires of 12 Fortune 500 CEOs and sent them to maximum security federal prisons. I had walked away from all of it. I buried that monster the exact day my beautiful wife, Isabel, received her first cancer diagnosis. I traded my secure government office and the thrill of the hunt for cold hospital waiting rooms, chemotherapy schedules, and quiet nights. I did it without a single regret. I became a full-time husband, then a grieving widower, and finally, an invisible grandfather trying to stay close to a daughter I barely knew. I let the Scalpel die because my family needed a father. But today, Gregory Harrison Vance and my daughter just gave the Scalpel a very good reason to come out of retirement. I sat down at the central console. My fingers didn't tremble as I dialed an encrypted 11-digit number on the secure satellite line. It was a number I hadn't touched in 10 long years, but one I had never forgotten. It rang twice. Avery Vance, a crisp, razor-sharp voice answered on the other end. Avery, I said, my voice dropping its soft, grandfatherly warmth, returning to the flat, hard steel of a federal prosecutor. It's Nathaniel Sterling. There was an immediate, breathtaking pause on the line, not of confusion, but of pure, profound shock. Mester? Sterling? Avery's voice suddenly lost its corporate detachment, turning breathless. My God, I thought you had fallen off the face of the earth. My father. He asked about you until the day he passed away. He always wondered what happened to the Scalpel. He used to tell me that your name alone was a living terror to every corrupt billionaire from New York to Zurich. He called you the ultimate nightmare of the financial elite. The nightmare is back, Avery, I replied, looking at the glowing monitors reflecting in my eyes. My daughter and her husband just filed for an emergency conservatorship against me in Greenwich. They are claiming I am senile. They want to strip my civil rights and liquidate my entire life savings to cover their own tracks. A sharp, cold bark of disbelief came through the phone. They filed for a conservatorship? Against you? They have absolutely no idea who they just tried to put in a cage, do they? They think they're hunting an old man, but they just triggered a legal nuclear bomb. Avery's tone shifted back into pure, lethal business. Consider my firm retained, Uncle Nate. My elite forensic team and I will catch the first morning train out of Manhattan. Just tell me, where exactly do you want the Scalpel to make the very first cut? I stared at the screen, a thin, cold smile finally touching my lips. We aren't going to court to defend my sanity, Avery. We are going to court to execute an empire. I'll see you at dawn. Avery Vance arrived at my Greenwich guest house at exactly 10 o'clock sharp the next morning. She didn't look like a typical, flashy Los Angeles or Manhattan corporate attorney. There was no over-the-top designer handbag, no loud jewelry, and no expensive entourage. She wore a simple, dark, tailored pantsuit, her hair pulled back into a severe, professional bun, and her eyes were the exact color of cold, unyielding steel. She carried a single, slim titanium briefcase. She was pure substance over style. The perfect, lethal continuation of her father's legal legacy. She didn't waste a single second on useless pleasantries. She stepped directly into my hidden digital sanctuary, her eyes sweeping across the glowing monitors, the servers, and the encrypted consoles, giving a single, appreciative nod. They truly have no idea what they've awakened, do they? She said softly, snapping her briefcase open and pulling out an encrypted federal database tablet. She took the copy of the conservatorship petition, her eyes narrowing onto the primary weapon Harrison had deployed against me, the psychological evaluation signed by Dr. Julian Albright. She didn't read the dramatic narrative. She plugged the name and medical license number directly into a secure backdoor network of the Department of Justice, a portal her father and I had built decades ago. Exactly 58 minutes later, the monitors flashed crimson. Nate, it's a joke, Avery said, her voice dropping into a cold, flat register dripping with absolute disgust. This man is not a psychologist. He's not a psychiatrist. He's not a neurologist. And he's not even a licensed general practitioner. Harrison didn't hire a compromised medical expert. He hired a ghost. The data pouring onto the screen unraveled the pristine, clinical image of Julian Albright in a matter of seconds. 5 years ago, in Miami, Florida, Julian Albright didn't wear a neat lab coat or evaluate mental competency. He was a disgraced cosmetic surgeon operating out of a sketchy, neon-lit strip mall. The Florida Medical Board hadn't just suspended him. They had permanently and irrevocably revoked his medical license. He was the mastermind behind a multi-million-dollar insurance fraud scheme, billing major providers for non-existent reconstructive surgeries. But his true specialty was far more sinister. Albright was running a massive, illegal pill mill, unlawfully prescribing hundreds of thousands of highly addictive opioid pills to street dealers and addicts for bags of untraceable cash. He wasn't a man of science. He was a corporate drug dealer who had narrowly avoided a 20-year federal prison sentence by turning state's evidence on his accomplices. Harrison had brought a literal, delicensed criminal into a Connecticut court to declare a former Department of Justice investigator insane. But as Avery's fingers flew across the keyboard, digging deeper into the encrypted Florida judicial archives, the true, sickening depth of the drama came to light. This wasn't a sudden, desperate bribe Harrison had put together last week because I refused his $500,000 loan. This was something far worse. This was cold, calculated, long-term premeditation. "Nate, look at the bail bondsman records from the Miami arrest," Avery whispered, her eyes fixed on the glowing terminal. When Albright was arrested 5 years ago, his bail was set at a massive $100,000 cash. He was completely broke, asset frozen, and facing immediate detention. But someone stepped in. A shell corporation registered in the state of Delaware signed as the financial guarantor, putting up the collateral and paying for his high-priced criminal defense attorneys. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto the name of the anonymous Delaware entity flashing on the monitor. Vance Holdings, LC. It was Harrison's private, shielded holding company. The pieces of the puzzle didn't just fall into place. They slammed together like a steel trap. Harrison hadn't discovered Julian Albright by accident through a mutual friend or an online registry. He had owned him for half a decade. He had paid for the criminal doctor's freedom, kept his secrets buried, and maintained him on a tight, expensive financial leash in the dark, waiting patiently for the exact day he would need a fraudulent medical signature to execute his own father-in-law. This lawsuit wasn't a reaction to my health scare or my refusal of his bridge loan. It was a long-term contingency plan designed to erase me the moment my estate became lucrative enough to steal. They thought they had built an airtight, 5-year trap around a frail old man. They had absolutely no idea that the Scalpel was now holding the handle, and my first surgical cut was going to expose their entire, rotten criminal alliance to the world. I sat perfectly still in the center of my biometric sanctuary, the modern world shrinking down to the unforgiving glow of my 3 monitors. Harrison truly believed finance in my day was done on faded paper ledgers by old men wearing green visors. He had no concept of the digital ghost he had tried to cage. I bypassed standard encryption protocols, utilizing legacy backdoors within the ERS and the Department of Justice mainframe, access codes built decades ago that the government had simply forgotten to close. I initiated a full financial autopsy on Vance Holdings GP and its layered nest of Delaware entities. What the servers unraveled was not a thriving empire, but a rotting corporate corpse. Harrison's supposed 9-figure slam dunk in the Hamptons was a catastrophic illusion. The project had completely burned through $50 million of capital, ground to a halt halfway through construction, and was currently buried under 16 separate mechanics' liens from furious, unpaid contractors. But the bleeding didn't stop at the construction site. My screen flashed with urgent correspondence from a private equity firm in Manhattan, Apex Citadel Capital. These weren't traditional bankers. They were vulture capitalists who provided high-interest lifelines to desperate men. And they had discovered Harrison's fraud. They had issued a brutal, non-negotiable capital call notice, demanding an immediate lump sum interest payment of $5 million within a strict 10-day deadline. If he failed to wire the funds, a sweeping cross-collateralization clause would activate, allowing Apex Citadel to instantly seize everything. The Greenwich Mansion, the corporate bank accounts, and every personal asset tied to his name. Harrison hadn't filed a conservatorship petition against me out of an impulsive reaction to his failed bridge loan. He did it because he was entirely, hopelessly bankrupt. He was a cornered animal trying to rob his own father-in-law, seeking to liquidate my entire estate not to build a resort, but to buy himself a few more days of stolen luxury. A new, dark question formed in my mind. If Harrison was completely broke, where did he get the immediate liquid cash to retain a sleazy law firm and pay off Julian Albright? My fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing a ledger I had avoided out of a foolish, sentimental trust. I opened the audit files for the Isabel Sterling Foundation. the multi-million-dollar charitable trust I had established after my wife passed away to fund early-stage cancer research. I had left our daughter, Victoria, as the managing director, believing it would give her a purposeful connection to the mother she lost. I looked at the top line of the statement. The asset value was supposed to be well over $3 million. The number staring back at me from the glowing screen was a pathetic $412,000. I scrolled through the transactions, my blood turning to pure ice. Victoria had signed off on a massive hemorrhage of capital. Over the past 2 months, she had authorized illegal transfers totaling $230,000 under the fraudulent guise of consulting fees and gala planning services, wired directly into Harrison's shell companies. She wasn't a blind victim being manipulated by an aggressive husband. She had used her own elegant, flowing signature to loot her mother's grave. She had stolen money meant for dying cancer patients, using the sacred memory of Isabel to finance the legal execution of her own father. I stared at her signature on the scanned checks, the grief inside my heart evaporating, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp focus. The paternal warmth was dead. The daughter was gone. Only the co-conspirator remained. The scalpel was deep inside the tumor now, and I was going to cut it out until there was nothing left but their absolute ruin. The day of reckoning arrived in Department 5B of the UDOT's District Court in Manhattan. Harrison and Victoria sat at the petitioner's table, practically vibrating with arrogance. Draped in high-end designer garments, they whispered and smirked, looking back at me in my 20-year-old charcoal gray suit as if my presence were nothing more than a pathetic, dying gasp of resistance. They genuinely believed they were about to quietly sign away my sanity. But then, the side door swung open, and Judge John Carmichael stepped onto the bench. He put on his reading glasses, looked down at the day's docket, and then looked directly at me. The air instantly left the room. Judge Carmichael went entirely pale, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of his wooden desk. He wasn't looking at a frail retiree. He was looking at a legend. 30 years ago, John Carmichael was a young, terrified federal prosecutor drowning in the multi-billion-dollar fraud case of the Enron Corporation, until I took the stand as his star expert witness and laid the corporate empire bare on a single spreadsheet. I had made his career. The judge slowly turned his icy gaze toward Harrison's slick, overconfident lawyer, Master Firo. Counselor, Judge Carmichael barked, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls like thunder. Are you even remotely aware of who your respondent is? That is Nathaniel, the Scalpel Sterling? Good luck. You are going to need it. Seeing his entire legal ambush unravel in a matter of seconds, Harrison completely lost his mind. Driven by pure, cornered panic, he violently knocked his chair backward and launched himself onto the witness stand to save his own skin. "This is a setup! The old man is crazy!" Harrison roared, sweating profusely, trying to project power, but only exposing his absolute desperation. "He's paranoid! He lost his mind because I offered him a golden opportunity, a guaranteed 40% return on my Hamptons Resort project. And his senile mind refused to write the check. He's letting his delusions ruin this family's future." He had just under oath linked his entire claim of my insanity to my refusal to give him money. He had built his own gallows. Avery stepped closer to the stand, a cold, surgical smile touching her lips. "A golden opportunity? Mr. Vance? Is that why your Hamptons project is currently $50 million over budget and facing 16 contractor liens? Is that why your primary lender, Apex Citadel Capital, has issued an emergency capital call for $5 million because you are hopelessly, completely bankrupt?" The words landed like a bomb. Harrison went entirely rigid, his mouth opening and closing silently. Victoria snapped, hearing the number, $50 million, and realizing her husband had entirely wiped out their life, lied to her face, and used her to commit federal fraud. The high society socialite completely lost her sanity. "You lied to me!" Victoria shrieked, jumping to her feet, her face a distorted mask of tears and smeared mascara. "You broke us! You stole my mother's money and you lied to me!" With a feral, animalistic scream, Victoria flew across the aisle, her manicured nails clawing violently at Harrison's face right in the witness box. Hysterical crying, guttural roaring, and the tearing of expensive fabric erupted into a chaotic, shameful boardroom brawl right before the bench. "Order! Order in this court!" Judge Carmichael thundered, slamming his gavel down relentlessly as 3 towering federal marshals rushed forward, violently pinning Harrison's arms behind his back and grabbing a screaming, thrashing Victoria. I sat perfectly still at my table, adjusting the cuffs of my Savile Row suit. The pristine, untouchable elite of Greenwich were bleeding out on the floor, tearing each other apart in pure, unadulterated humiliation. The quiet father had been holding back for 10 long years, and now, the scalpel had ripped the tumor completely wide open. The chaos at the petitioner's table died down into a tense, suffocating silence as the federal marshals forced Harrison back into his seat. His face was a disheveled, sweaty mask of pure rage. Even with his fake expert in custody and his fraud exposed, Harrison looked across the courtroom at me and let out a desperate, unhinged sneer, clinging to the last shred of his hollow Wall Street pride. "You think you won something, old man?" Harrison hissed, his voice cracking with venom. "You're still a nobody. You have nothing. You live in a tiny guest house on my estate because of my charity. Go back to your little beige box and rot." "You can't touch me," I didn't yell. I didn't match his pathetic anger. Instead, I slowly rose to my feet, buttoning my Savile Row jacket with absolute, unhurried precision. I looked down the length of the courtroom at him, the expression on my face as cold and unyielding as granite. "It seems you are a little behind on the financial news, Harrison," I said, my voice quiet, deep, and cutting through the courtroom air like winter ice. "You were quite right about one thing. Your primary lender, Apex Citadel Capital, was preparing to aggressively liquidate your entire life. They were holding $5 million of toxic, defaulted paper. But 48 hours ago, the direction of the cash flow changed." Harrison froze, his eyes widening slightly as I continued. "I picked up the secure line and called my old friend, Charles Chuck Sterling, the chairman of Apex Citadel. 30 years ago, during the Enron cleanup, I saved his career from a federal indictment. He owed me an ancient, unpayable debt. I invoked that chip. I used a blind trust to completely buy out your entire $5 million note. Every single dollar of your debt was transferred to my ledger. I am no longer just your father-in-law, Harrison. I am your sole, sovereign creditor. And I am calling the note due, effective immediately." The reality of his absolute destruction hit Harrison like a physical blow. His mouth dropped open, a silent, pathetic gasp escaping his lips as he collapsed backward into his chair. The mansion in Greenwich, the luxury sports cars, the corporate holding companies, and even the expensive designer suit he was wearing on his back. Every single piece of his stolen paradise now belonged to me. The justice that followed was swift, clinical, and completely devastating. Harrison didn't get a comfortable white-collar plea deal. The district court buried him under an avalanche of my financial forensics. He was sentenced to 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for grand larceny, bank fraud, and suborning perjury. But the ledger required a separate, more poetic entry for my daughter. Victoria's tears did not wash away the ink on the check she signed to loot her mother's foundation. The court found her fully guilty of the felony misuse of charitable funds. She was handed 3 years of strict criminal probation and hit with a crushing, mandatory sentence, 2,000 hours of hard, uncompensated community service. The judge did not send her to file papers in a clean corporate office. He assigned her to the locked, maximum security dementia and Alzheimer's unit at the Glenwood Gardens Care Facility. For the next 3 years, the woman who had tried to legally declare her father senile to steal his money would spend her weekends cleaning, feeding, and washing truly disoriented men and women who could not remember their own names. She was forced to live inside the very nightmare she had tried to build for me. 6 months later, the toxic dust had finally settled over Greenwich. I placed Harrison's sprawling $15 million mansion under the hammer, selling it at a massive public auction. Every single dollar from that sale went back into the Isabel Sterling Foundation under an independent board of elite medical trustees, ensuring that my wife's legacy would fund cancer research for decades to come. The remainder was placed into an ironclad trust fund for my grandson, Logan, ensuring his future was safe from the vultures. Now, I am standing inside my small guest house. The walls are bare, the server racks are powered down, and the cardboard boxes are neatly stacked by the door. I am leaving Greenwich tonight, returning to the clean, quiet air of the North. I held the old silver-framed photograph of Isabel in my hand, looking into her gentle eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, a soft, genuine smile touched my face. My family looked at my advanced age, my quiet lifestyle, and my gray suits, and they assumed I was a weak, forgetful old man they could easily trample into the dirt. They mistook my patient silence for weakness. They forgot that the most dangerous weapon in the world isn't a gun or a loud shout. It is a man who knows exactly how to read the numbers and has the discipline to wait for the ice to break. I never wanted revenge. I wanted accountability. And today, the books are finally clean. Silence is never weakness. My ledger is completely, perfectly balanced. Because in the heart of the righteous, vengeance never sleeps. What would you have done if you discovered your own blood had looted a sacred legacy to build a swimming pool? Would you have held the scalpel, or would you have walked away? Let me know your thoughts on this final financial audit in the comments below. If Nathaniel's journey of quiet, absolute justice resonated with your soul, smash that like button, hit hit subscribe to the Vengeance Never Sleeps channel and share this video with anyone who needs to remember that respect is never negotiable. Stay sharp, stay vigilant, and until the next audit, remember, vengeance never sleeps.